Sevenfold. Please blame Captain Magus for failing to instruct me.
Hey, watch it!
Orphie is finally out, our latest limited fire attacker, who really ends up being as much of a support unit as an attacker. I've already got a guide that covers how Orphie functions at a baseline M0 level, so I'll refer you to that if you want more on her as a character. Instead, let's take some time here to go over Orphie's vertical investments and what her Mindscapes do, as well as how they change the way she plays. Because they can change a fair bit. If you go all in, she can rival, or at times even exceed, Evelyn as a main damage unit, like managing a 65-second kill of Pompey. M1 Luxurious Cat House provides 15% fire rest shred to Special Corrosive Flash, EX Special Crimson Vortex, EX Special Heat Charge, and its follow-up Fiery Eruption. It also provides a 20% damage bonus to all agents with a zeroed in buff, meaning it applies to Orphie herself and all party members. It's a static Mindscape, and other websites and theory crafters have estimated it as a personal damage difference of 20%. With Sandy and Trigger, you can expect somewhere between a 10 to 15% increase in total team damage output. Even if Orphie isn't doing half of all the team damage, she's still contributing a significant portion of it, at least a third, all the while also buffing her teammates, who then go on to do more damage themselves. In fact, it is pretty darn strong on aftershock-driven teams. With Sandy and Trigger able to constantly refresh the zeroed-in buff for themselves, the uptime on the damage up is functionally permanent. So as far as Mindscapes go, it's pretty good. But on C teams, it gets weaker. The 20% damage bonus does get pretty darn saturated, especially with Dawn's Bloom and Deadly Assault buffs like Fiery Assault. Just those two alone already give a combined increase of 125%. Then there's an extra 25% from Besiege, 30% from Seed's additional ability, and if you have her signature, another 25% from Quarter's Germina. That's a total increase of 205%. If you're running an Astro comp with Astro Voice and Moonlight Lullaby, that'd be another 62% damage bonus, clocking in at almost 270%. So that 20% damage increase is actually barely over 7% at that level of saturation. It's also only active when the zeroed-in buff is up, and Orphie is not really capable of maintaining full uptime of it on non-aftershock units. When accounting for downtime, you may be seeing something closer to a 5% increase in damage for Seed instead. The buff isn't just team damage though. Heck, the more significant portion of it comes with the 15% fire res shred Orphie gets. This is where it's important to look at the fine print. What skills did the buff again? Orphie's standard special aftershock, okay. Her EX special aftershock too, yeah. As well as heat charge and its fiery eruption follow-up. Hold on a second. Nowhere here does it say it buffs EX Watch Your Step. If you play Orphie on a Seed comp, you will want to frequently swap to her to hard cast Watch Your Step to generate Steel Charge for Seed and avoid overcapping on energy. None of these casts benefit from the Fire Res Shred, which further diminishes the value she provides to Seed teams. In fact, it elevates the value of just letting Orphie do her thing. Even if a regular Aftershock into a Watch Your Step is technically more damage per energy spent than an EX Aftershock, the lack of Fire Res Shred means just doing EX Aftershocks over and over ends up being better. I do find it funny in a pitiful way how not only did they make Orphie have anti-synergy with Seed at her baseline level, they also made it a point to have her Mindscapes not work all that well with Seed either. Even with all that, it's still a strong Mindscape. I wouldn't say it's as good as the more well-regarded ones like Astra M1 or Trigger M1, but for Aftershock teams it's a great vertical investment. If you've got Evelyn's signature lying about somewhere, it'd likely be better to go for M1 than Bellico's Blaze, depending on the team that is. But Mindscapes can cost a lot more than Wengeance, so keep that in mind. M2 Weird Food List is where it starts getting interesting. It can outright change how you route fights, and that's because of its bonus. 65 decibels restored whenever Orphie uses an Aftershock with a 4-second cooldown. Plus, a 20% combat attack increase for 45 seconds after using Ultimate. And unlike the bonuses from M1, the decibel increase on M2 applies to all Aftershocks, which means the decibel bonus can be triggered by active attacks, like Watch Your Step. There are a few caveats. Although it's a 4-second cooldown, realistically you're not getting it every 4 seconds. Even 5 is too much. It applies to Watch Your Step, sure, but if you're swapping to Orphie 1 second before her Aftershock is due to happen, you'd be worse off. Getting it early with a hardcast animation isn't going to be better than being a second late but not delaying the Aftershock ticks. And this bonus is for Orphie only. Other characters do not get half of the decibel she generates through it. Just having more decibels on Orphie is plenty good though, as her decibel generation at baseline is frankly terrible. At first it looks like it's nearly non-existent. The regular special Aftershock generates 0 decibels. Nothing at all. Thankfully, her EX Aftershock generates around 57 decibels. Likewise, Watch Your Step does too. The idea here is that it doesn't matter if you're swapping to Orphie after a regular Aftershock and then go on to a Watch Your Step, or you're just letting her expend energy on her EX Aftershocks, her decibel economy remains the same. Then you realize that you're getting on average 57 decibels every 5 seconds. It would take you over 4 minutes of spin to get enough decibels for one ultimate. In practice, she's getting decibels from the active unit, and Orphie herself generates some with heat charge and the occasional parry. Yet that just about affords 2 ultimates in a deadly assault run. Orphie's decibel economy is truly abysmal for an attacker. Orphie's M2 fixes the decibel problem. Getting 120 decibels on one EX Aftershock is pretty darn great. But more than just numbers, the extra gain means that on most fights, you should be getting 1 extra ultimate. Not only are you using more ultimates, the faster build means you're likely getting them at better times. On a fight like Pompey, with Evelyn, Fufu, and M2 Orphie, ultimates were lining up perfectly on every stun, coming up just in time as I needed them the most. I'm sure that with good routing, such as balancing parries between Evelyn and Orphie, or working around anomaly triggers, means that even without Fufu's decibel refund, I can see Orphie M2 making a huge difference. It remedies her issues with decibel generation and can make rotations much smoother. And let's not forget the 20% combat attack buff after using the ultimate. Since it's a percentile bonus and not flat, it isn't all that bad even when the attack bonuses from zeroed in are taken into account. With a 45-second duration in a deadly assault run with 3 users, you could technically keep the buff rolling for almost the whole run. 45 seconds before your first ultimate, then 45 seconds for the second, then 45 seconds for the third, which leaves you with 45 seconds until the run and the buff ends. Realistically, this is getting shifted forwards, as the 1000 decibel gain on start means you do get access to it a bit earlier, but with good rotations on most fights, it's something that won't be too much of a struggle to keep up. All of this is a huge increase to Orphie's personal damage output and contribution. At this level of investment, she's likely going to out-DPS the agent that should have been the primary damage dealer in a party. With such a busted Mindscape, you'd be expecting some pretty big score increases, right? Different websites and other content creators have calculated the increase of M0 to M2 to be 40%. If Orphie is doing 40% more personal damage, you'd be expecting at least a 25% increase in total team damage, given how she's likely to be doing at least half of the team damage at this point. My full M0P1 Seed Trigger Orphie team was scoring 54 to 55,000 on Defiler, which means I'd be expecting something like 63,000 at least. But I was averaging a 15% increase in damage over M0, a total score of just under 60,000 instead. Granted, it was not as optimized, but Orphie isn't going to be giving a 25% increase in total damage score for Defiler. Want to fight like Pompey? Yeah, sure, there's barely any downtime, and as mentioned before, automates can line up perfectly with stuns, making for smooth rotations. On UCC, where there's no downtime at all and Orphie isn't being taken up in parries or other animations, this is wonderful. Defiler? Terrible. The strength of this Mindscape is very much dependent on the encounter. How often is Orphie landing hits that are aftershocks, and how much of the combat attack buff is usable rather than being taken up by invulnerability. Routing this fight with M2 is very different from routing it at M0, and it ends up being a lot more difficult. I'd find that with this Mindscape, I'd get ultimate very early on, but if I used it, there was no way it was coming back in time for the first stun. Any time holding on ultimate is time not benefiting from the combat attack buff, so using it early always gave me better scores. But then I'd come across another problem. Ultimate would be coming up again before Defiler goes off into her invulnerability phase. If I use it at, say, 130 on the clock, it only really starts contributing to damage again at 105. That's 25 seconds of the combat attack buff gone. So instead I could hold it and use it on the second stun, but if I did that, I'd be so behind in decibels that I'd just barely have time to fit it in at the end of a run. Shield bearers were also wasting 10 seconds on the buff, a lot less than the 25 from the totem phase, but considering I wasn't really getting any mileage out of the third ultimate's combat attack buff meant that they both ended up feeling about the same. I'd say early ultimate use on the Defiler is better, as you at least have the combat attack buff for most of the second stun, whereas a standard rotation with a late ultimate has it only come out at the end of it anyways. Defiler is also a horrible boss to fight with this comp generally, but for Orphie's M2, it felt particularly bad as its benefits were limited. So much of this fight's decibel gain comes from back-to-back parries where Orphie isn't aftershocking, so the relative gain is lower. You're getting more decibels by parrying on Orphie and using her assist follow-up than you would by not parrying and letting her aftershock. And the invulnerability phases mean not only fewer aftershocks to build the extra decibels on cooldown, but a significant waste of the combat attack buff. Pompey, UCC, really any boss that isn't affording you enough time mid-fight to get up and get yourself some tea is gonna get destroyed by this Mindscape. But then put her in Defiler and the gains just aren't all that big. So as with every Mindscape, it has to be considered in context of the fights in which characters are used in. Overall though, it's a great Mindscape, and the increases it provides for most bosses is nothing to scoff at. M4 Pink Holster is one that brings about another consideration, the characters in which you're running Orphie with. It's rather straightforward. A 40% damage buff to heat charge on ultimate, as well as an extension to the zeroed in duration, up from 12 seconds to 16 seconds. The damage increase is pretty good. With how long heat charge takes, it can frequently prevent Orphie from doing aftershocks if not well managed. Its damage is okay, although even it and Fiery Eruption put together don't beat out an EX aftershock. A 40% damage boost to it though? Now it's pretty darn good. Keep in mind that it only applies to heat charge, not Fiery Eruption. That means it's only the beam that gets the bonus. Ultimate though is buffed in full, and when combined with the extra decibels from M2, does pack a punch over the course of a run. Given the relatively high amounts of damage percent saturation we're getting to now, these improvements are welcomed but nothing all that significant. What is significant is the increase to zeroed in. In a Sambi team, this really doesn't do all that much. It's not difficult to have 100% uptime off the buff, so the extra duration doesn't help. Unless you're me and get caught up by a parry string and forget to aftershock right after. Skill issues aside, this Mindscape is really negligible for aftershock comps. For a C team though, it's massive. 4 extra seconds on zeroed in can completely change your rotation and combo game. Instead of always needing to open stun with heat charge, you have much better maintenance of it. It lasts so long that you can use heat charge way before stun and still have time to build bottled heat back up, allowing for a refresh mid-combo that effectively maintains zeroed in uptime for all the critical attacks. For C teams, this combo guarantees an EX aftershock as ultimate lands, so you can even swap to it early and get seed buffs for its damage, leading to better synergy. Even if you aren't altering your rotations for it, just having it last longer means that a greater proportion of other characters' damage benefits from the buff. So for an aftershock team, this Mindscape does very little. For a non-aftershock team, it's way more than just some quality of life. Lastly, M6, Magic Seed. This Mindscape is pretty game-changing because it has the potential to fully overhaul how you play Orphie. It does a lot of things. First, Heat Charge now has a high interrupt level on the low power phase. No getting baited by parries just as the high power phase begins, as it immediately interrupts enemies. Second, the laser on Heat Charge and Ultimate now do an extra 250% damage multiplier hit every 0.5 seconds, being considered as EX and Aftershock damage regardless of the move it's from. Heat Charge gets a total of 4 ticks during its cast. That more than doubles its total damage multiplier. When you pair it with the skill level increases from M3 and M5, it's doing almost 2,000 by itself, over 2,500 with Fiery Eruption. Ultimate seems to get 5 or 6 ticks. It's a bit hard to tell with all the numbers, but it hits real hard. Just make sure to swap out of it, otherwise it only gets 2 ticks. Emphasis should be placed on the laser portion of the attacks, so the slashes at the start and the explosion at the end do not count. All of this is a sizable increase to Orphie's damage, especially because the third bonus actually now has more ways of getting bottled heat. Namely, the Fireblade portion of Orphie's basic attack now generates 10 bottled heat. This significantly increases the value of Fireblade, especially as more bottled heat means more heat charges, and more heat charges means more zeroed in, and more 2,500% damage multiplier bursts. And the last bonus, which is perhaps the most important, is that Orphie now gets to use her EX Aftershocks as the active agent. Pressing special after a Fireblade attack will lead straight into an EX Aftershock if there's energy available. The best part is that this doesn't use up the Aftershock cooldown. Orphie can go from an active cast EX Aftershock right into a standard EX Aftershock back to back. If Orphie has no energy, she won't use the regular special version of the Aftershock. It's only to the EX variant and only if she has energy. So it can get pretty energy intensive. A Watch Your Step into an active EX Aftershock, then a regular EX Aftershock is 90 energy just like that. But the high energy generation from Fireblade helps make up for it. Since it's also done while Orphie is active, it generates Steel Charge for Seed, making up for much of their anti-synergy. What all of this amounts to is that Orphie can be played as an active, constantly on-field damage dealer. Since Fireblade comes at the end of a basic attack string, you could even skip the Watch Your Step shortcut and instead use Orphie's standard basic attacks. Get the Fireblade normally, go into the active cast EX Aftershock, and then swap to another character. That triggers an extra use, and from there, go right back into it, making sure all energy is being used only for EX Aftershocks. Whether you do that, or choose to weave in active casts between Aftershocks, or run Orphie as a hybrid on and off-field character, all of it works, with one being able to approach optimal play in a variety of styles. I think that about covers it for Orphie Mindscapes. They can range from obscenely strong to mediocre depending on the encounter and the team she plays with, and surprisingly, need a fair bit of thought and adaptation to make good use of them. While we're at it, I might as well check in a showcase of an Orphie M2 run, as that will be a bit more relatable than the full M6P5 at the start. It's not my highest scoring run, which used late ultimate routing, but I found it to be better, just unlucky with no Defiler spin attacks at the start. It'd certainly have pulled out ahead if I bothered to reset for good patterns. Not getting a spin opener is a significant score loss, be it from the complete lack of adjudication stacks or the lack of days, which turned out to bite me at the end with my inability to complete 3 stunts. This could easily go beyond 60,000, just don't bet on a magical 25% increase to your scores. RNG aside, it can serve as a good template for future routes. Before we go into it, why not like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell? I've got more videos coming. Now let's get into the run.